Joy Unspeakable by Barbara A. Holmes. Joy unspeakable is not silent. It moans, hums, and bends to the rhythm of a dancing universe. For our free African ancestors, joy unspeakable is drum talk. For enslaved Africans during the Middle Passage, joy unspeakable is the surprise of living one more day. For Africans in bondage in the Americas, joy unspeakable is the moment of the mystical encounter when God tiptoes into the hush harbor. Joy unspeakable is humming How I Got Over after swimming safely to the other shore of a swollen Ohio River when you know that you can't swim.
Are there any pains in your hearts? There are pains in my heart. I started this project called Broken Hearts Are Connected Through Love a few months ago. This has traveled in different places. I ask people to just tear this old clothes and connect it to any way you want. Just tie it, weave it, so we are connected. And then take a piece of it with you, so you can remember that our broken hearts are connected through love. I was at my daughter's wedding in April, and it was so beautiful because it was filled with Asian Americans. It was multicultural, but a lot of us were there. I've never experienced a place like that in this country. And I lived here since 1984, so that's a long time. I've suffered from the idea that I can be someday successful if I become a real American. And the real American never looked like me. But in this beautiful space, I didn't have to apologize for my presence. I never had to explain where I was from. I was just one with all the people. I was going to tell you all about that, how wonderful that place was. But it didn't feel right to do that in this space where I and many of people of color feel that we don't fit in. And I also know that the white supremacy culture hurts everybody, not just us. Some of you may have white face. but you're not perfect. And the white supremacy culture tells us we have to be perfect. We have to be the ideal, successful American, or something is wrong with us. So we are all broken. And you are invited to participate in this ritual after the service. But I want to tell you, brokenness and a struggle to fight this notion that we have to be perfect and look like something, this ideal image of real American. That is beautiful. That is beautiful. So, in the next few minutes, we're just going to move with the music. And I invite all of you to let your soul move your body. I know many people are suffering. I'm not a good dancer. I can't feel the rhythm. But who's telling you that? I have a few scarves to share. It really helps. Anybody who wants to use it, please, don't be afraid. It feels so good to move. Don't just watch me dance. That's white supremacy, you know. You're all so beautiful with all the mistakes and missed beats and everything. You're beautiful. We're going to make mistakes in doing this work, and we may never get to that nirvana that we talk about all the time. But you know what? We are all beautiful, and we can do this work together.
Let's sit with that for a little bit. True to myself, True to myself, yes, I must be true to myself. So much talk outside that wants to control my life. True to myself, I must be true to myself. Getting to know myself, I'm getting to know myself. Getting to know myself, I'm getting to know myself. So much talk outside that wants to decide my life. True to myself, I must be true to myself. I want to be all and live in the present. To be all and live the life meant for me. To be called, surrender to be free. True to myself, I must be true to myself. I want to be whole and live in the present. To be all and live the life meant for me. To be called, surrender to be free. True to myself, I must be true to myself. Learning to love myself, I'm learning to love myself. Learning to love myself, I'm learning to love myself. So much talk outside that wants to destroy my life. True to myself, I must be true to myself. True to myself, I must be true to myself.
Good morning. Being a Unitarian Universalist requires something of us. Our shared faith calls us to sacrifice something in response to calling this place our own. What is that cost? It is the cost of working daily in our lives toward justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, to upholding a commitment to democracy without squelching the needs of marginalized voices who don't constitute a majority. It is a willingness to care beyond ourselves for the interdependent web of which we are a part, and to consider how our actions impact others at every turn. Being a Unitarian Universalist is not an easy path. If we live out this faith beyond Sunday morning, we are confronted at every turn with a chance to live out these daily commitments in our lives. And yet, in the challenge, there is comfort. In this work toward justice making, there is peace. We can lean into it where it may yet be found. I am reminded that as Unitarian Universalists, we count among the sources of our faith Jewish and Christian teachings which call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors as ourselves. As I probe those teachings about love and community, I'm especially struck by the creation stories preserved in the book of Genesis in the Hebrew Bible. Now, before I go further, let me say that while I am theistic in my own orientation to this faith, I recognize that words like God can be challenging for some in our community, and I respect that. Please know that when I speak of God, what I mean is a power that exists beyond individual human agency. A power that arises and resides in community as community when we enact a shared commitment to love and equity and to being transformed in the service of our work towards making justice. I am appealing to something beyond our individual agency to which we yield in the building of a beloved community that is wide and deep and broad enough to hold us all across our differences. A community that might not be perfect for anyone, but that is good for all of us. In the book of Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 31, we are told that God created the world in 6 days. Now, I'm not here to parse the literal nature of the story, or to determine exactly what is meant by the word day, or to study the historical veracity of the text. Rather, I invite us to look beyond those heady concerns to something else that the narrative is pointing to, namely, that the spirit of life and love created something with speech, through words, through divine utterance. We are given a glimpse here to the notion that there is power in this holy breath to call something into being in a place where nothing existed before. The authors of Genesis report that in the beginning, when God began the work of creation, a wind from God swept over the waters. Now, in Hebrew, the word for this divine wind or spirit is ruah. What's especially interesting to me is that in the second chapter of Genesis, in verse 7, this same breath, this ruah, is poured into and shared with humankind to bring forth life and animate our being. This same divine breath that we are told hovered over the expanse of nothingness and then called the natural world into being is breathed into God's first human creation. This breath of life is shared intimately between the human and the divine. What comfort may we find in this narrative as we seek to do the work of dismantling white supremacy and systems of oppression that harm so many people every day? What does this old story from the wisdom literature of a minoritized people from long ago have to offer us now? I invite us to consider there is a power in us that is as close to us as our own breath. It courses through our very being. In the story from this desert community long ago, we are told that people share the divine breath that creates, that animates, that calls forth in places where there was nothing before. We are reminded in the first principle upheld by our member congregations that we are to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Now, refracted through the lens of a white supremacist culture, that principle is wrongly interpreted to be about our individual specialness, our right to perfect comfort, or life without challenge in our congregations. Understood properly, that principle reminds us that everyone we interact with is our neighbor, one who shares that same divine breath, and that each of us is worthy of respect, a respect that includes moving through the world without being forced to navigate systems that foreclose opportunities based on race or other markers of identity. The power that some call God, that some call the spirit of life, that some call the healing energy that arises in community, resides among us. We gather together in worship and lift up the good that comes, the God that comes, when we share in the work of dismantling oppression and enact our commitment to justice. We have been called into being for such a time as this to live out the bonds of beloved community, to make that vision a reality. Now, we know that no human institution is perfect, but we are reminded that we don't need to be perfect to share in the divine work of creation, to use our breath, our money, our time, our talent, our resources, and our collective energy to build a world where equity and justice reigns. We have a chance to accept the call that life demands, that faith demands, that Unitarian Universalism demands, to embody life reaching out to life, love reaching out to love, to embody the deepest truth-telling we can find so that we might liberate ourselves and each other with our stories, just as generations have found peace in the story of divine breath in the book of Genesis. This moment asks those who benefit from asymmetrical privilege, wrought by systems of oppression, to sacrifice the myth of meritocracy. Give up the notion that everything owned has been earned. Instead, this moment is calling us to examine how our social and cultural position rests on the oppression of those who have been marginalized and minoritized, erased from human narratives, and left to suffer in an unjust world. This moment asks if we will use our breath to speak truth to power, to openly challenge rhetorical violence, to make space for those who have been spoken over. We can take a deep collective breath and move forward into a future that mirrors the world of equity and justice that we dream about. We can exhale our anxieties and pretensions, stop looking for the next charismatic male leader, and follow those on the front lines in the fight for love and justice who don't necessarily embody what we think leadership should look like or sound like or be like. As a community, we can breathe life into something new. Breathe. May it be so. Amen, Amin, Ashe.